It was just, as I said, transformative. I just decided, listen, this is a new pathway. This idea of an academic career. The Rio Tinto Center opened in 2011, and it's a phenomenally attractive building. It's a landmark architectural masterpiece. Hi, my name is Jason Cryan. I'm the director of the Natural History Museum of Utah, and I would like to welcome you to this fantastic museum. You're in for an exciting visit. Come, let's explore. It's just a gorgeous place, and when you build a new building as a museum, it gives you the opportunity to create bespoke exhibitions. The coast of California has several museums that are larger than we are. But in between those two boundaries, we are the largest museum. We are the state's designated Museum of Natural History. We're also the University of Utah's Museum of Natural History. Our museum is what we call a true science museum. We have 2 million plus specimens.
Talk to me about, the uniqueness of the Natural History Museum. If you've been thinking about buying or selling a home in Utah, you should talk to Spencer Ford. The market here moves fast, and having someone who actually knows the neighborhoods, pricing trends, and how to negotiate can make a huge difference. Spencer works with buyers, sellers, and people just trying to figure out what their next move should be. Whether you're looking for your first place, upgrading, downsizing, or just curious what your home could sell for, he's someone I'd recommend reaching out to. You can find a link to get in touch with him and his email in the show notes below. And when you reach out, let him know you heard about him on Small Lake City. If you've been thinking about getting your car detailed, protected, or completely transformed, you need to check out Lux Automotive. They specialize in paint protection film, ceramic coatings, window tint, vinyl wraps, paint correction, and premium detailing. All done with insane attention to detail. Utah roads and weather can absolutely destroy your paint, and Lux helps protect your investment while keeping your car looking brand new. Whether it's your daily driver, weekend car, or something exotic, their team does incredible work and the results speak for themselves. Visit luxautomotive.com or use the link in the show notes to learn more. There's a million things you could do, like you could be an accountant, or you could work at a history museum and be able to wear bright shirts and tie-dye socks to work.
Right. Yep, totally true.
It's so, especially the people I've talked to who are in something like some similar capacity, I can't think of her name right now to save my life, but the director at the Children's Museum downtown.
Kathleen Bunless.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And just being like, how do you do this? How do you get into it's just such this specific thing, especially to get in such a leadership role, and kind of the pathway to get it is so fun because, the kind of question I had leading up to this that kind of made me want to reach out is I was talking to someone and someone's like, no one asks me what my favorite dinosaur is anymore. Right. And I was like, fair. Can't remember that happened.
Yeah, right.
But then there's people like you that's I hear that question every day. I ask kids every day. I get to see it. I know so much about dinosaurs. It's probably so much more nuanced than that. But and it's also been such an iconic place in Utah, especially on campus from where it used to be on President Circle, and then the new building's amazing. Run by it all the time when I'm going on Shoreline, and as so many people do. But I want to hear so much of the story of how you ended up there. But talk to me about, the path leading up to it. What made you want to get into that general field at the beginning?
Okay, I assume we're on.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, all right, very cool. So, all right. Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. It's great.
Oh, happy to.
Really enjoy it. So I'm not a Utahn originally. I'm an East Coaster. And so my story starts, I was born and raised in Burlington, Vermont. So Green Mountains and University of Vermont. I stayed there.
Booming coat industry.
Yeah, totally. It was a great place to grow up. It was idyllic, kind of, college town, right on the lake, Lake Champlain, gorgeous. The high peaks of the Adirondacks in the distance, plus the Green Mountains of Vermont, kind of ringing the city. So, kind of a gorgeous place to grow up. I grew up. I'll date myself. I was born in 1970, the same year that Earth Day was born.
Oh, really?
And so I grew up in, Vermont's known to be a bit of a crunchy kind of place. Yeah. So I grew up in this ethos, this kind of environment of, certainly sustainability and environmental ethic, and kind of enjoying the outside, the outdoors. Nature is something that we need to save and preserve and keep for our future generations. So that's kind of how I grew up. And I wasn't, a kid who liked necessarily any one particular thing. I wasn't a bug kid or a, dinosaur kid or whatever. But it was that time of the my development where we were just always outside. So, unlike many kids these days, the new generation, kind of sound like an old guy, where their life is so regulated.
Yep.
I was in the generation where my parents, especially in the summertime, would say, lunch is at noon and dinner's at 5, come on back, and otherwise have a great time.
Yeah.
And so that's how I grew up. I was just always climbing trees and
like that area to me is so fascinating because like when I was in the van, I spent a good amount of time up there.
Oh, good.
And when I went, like kind of took the route of like up through Erie, Pennsylvania, up through waterfalls, Niagara Falls, and like around the top.
Yeah.
And like before I went up there, because I didn't really had spent too much time in like the Northeast.
Yep.
My experience of the East Coast was like, interned in DC. When you intern in DC, you go to all like the different major cities there. And like, I never really felt like I was like very Boston or like, I'm just like not an East Coast major metropolitan person. And that's fine. Like to visit, but like as far as like living there day-to-day life, I'm okay. But it wasn't until I got into like upstate New York and like in the Adirondacks and especially like that New Hampshire and Vermont area, I was like, oh, this is actually pretty sweet.
Yeah. And in many ways, that sweetness, that spot is very similar to what I found out here in Utah. So there's a kind of a shared love of the environment, a shared appreciation of nature. Yeah. And so that's my upbringing and kind of what I'm experiencing now in many ways are kind of parallel.
Totally.
So I stayed there. I stayed there in Vermont until I graduated undergrad from University of Vermont. And it was during those years at UVM that I started doing undergrad research in addition to my coursework as a zoology major. And I was paired at one point with an old faculty member. He was older at the time.
If you're trying to keep up with everything life throws at you, work, workouts, long runs, rounds of golf, whatever it might be, having your nutrition dialed matters. That's why I use Gnarly Nutrition. From supporting my recovery to fueling performance and helping me feel good no matter what I've got going on. And even better, they're located right here in Utah. Whether you're in the gym, on the trail, or just trying to get through your day, Gnarly has you covered. Check them out through the link in the description to see why they've become part of my daily routine.
He was an entomologist, and so he...
For those who may not know, what does an entomologist study?
Yeah, sorry, jargon. Entomologist, the study of insects.
Okay.
And so he was a bug guy. He was this kind of old, irascible, cool, faculty member who had definitely been around the world and experienced a lot of things. But in this work that I did with him, he took us out to the field and we'd run through root forest and whatever. And he knew everything. So he knew the bugs certainly, but he also knew the mammal footprints and scat, and he knew the plants, and he knew the birds and all the stuff. And he did it in kind of this humble, kind of cool way, with a very dry, quirky sense of humor. And it was one of those situations where I just, I was drawn in and really engaged by this. And it was one of those kind of transformative moments where I said, I want to be that guy.
Yeah.
It was that one teacher that changes your life. But with my upbringing in Earth Day and all of that nature stuff, and after surviving many years in Vermont, I said I want to be that guy, but I want to do it in the tropics. So I had this kind of love for exploration and biodiversity and these kinds of things. So I had a wonderful time there at undergraduate, graduated, and then I went to graduate school at NC State University, North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina, for entomology and evolutionary biology. And I chose that program for a variety of reasons, but the chief maybe among them was that my major professor allowed me to choose what group of bugs that I was going to be working on. And it just so happens that he was a specialist in a group that was primarily tropical and just wacky. I mean, just really bizarre things.
Well, and that's the fun part. Like, because, I mean, growing up, and anybody can say that about the area they grew up in. It's like, oh, yeah, everything here's boring.
Sure.
And then until someone comes and visits and they're like, oh my gosh, a deer. I'm like, yeah. Anyway, moving on. But like, I mean, the easiest place to compare to is like Australia. Like you hear of bugs there, you're like, I don't want to go there simply because of the bugs.
Yeah.
But to be able to be like, hey, actually, I want to go to the place where it's like the funnest, the most unique, and do this. Yeah. And especially to have like someone open that up for you in the beginning of like where, I mean, you're in Vermont, you're in your hometown, probably walking in similar places you grew up walking around all the time. But here's this guy that comes in and make something so ordinary become very magical.
Exactly right. Totally right. And it was really a new vista, a new horizon that he opened up for me. Is that, and in fact, I had to tell you that the exciting thing of my work with him, my specific research with him, was I was being paid in the summer and then for credit in the other semesters. My project was to hike one of the bigger mountains in Vermont 3 or 4 times a week, checking pitfall traps for beetles at various altitudinal levels. So I was doing an altitudinal biodiversity gradient study on the ground beetle fauna of this mountain in the Green Mountains, this Camel's Hump, which is the name of the mountain. So, here I was a, 19, 20-year-old kid, hiking all the time and doing science and exploring and discovering things. And that just opened a new world for me.
That's so amazing.
So it was just, as I said, transformative. And I just decided, listen, this is a new pathway. This idea of an academic career, which I hadn't really considered before. I started off as a pre-med student. And so this was just a classic
undergrad.
Right,
I'm going to go to med school.
Exactly.
2 semesters later, no, I'm not.
Totally right. And as we had said before, I didn't find that passion. I really was doing that because my parents were in the medical field, and I thought, well, they have a pretty good life. Maybe I'll do that. But then when this happened, this kind of transformative period happened, and I really decided that this is what I wanted to do, then again, it opened up a whole new world.
And so once you go to NC State, you find the guy who's like, all right, we're going to bugs and we're going to the tropics.
Totally.
I mean, were you just did you have any idea of what that could lead to? Or are you mostly just hunting this passion and seeing where it could take you? So
it's a good question. I think at the time, I really thought that I was going to be the next Dr. Cryan at University of X, fill in your, insert name here. And I was really following that academic pathway. And I thought, okay, master's degree, get that. PhD, get that. Do a postdoctoral fellowship, get that. And then I'll find a job somewhere at some college or university. And so that's really what my pathway was at the time. And then it changed radically later on. But to get there, I stayed in graduate school for, it took me, I guess, 7 years to finish those 2 degrees. Entomology, systematic entomology. So the science of systematics is a science about evolution and biodiversity, and it includes 2 separate sub-sciences, if you will. One is taxonomy, so I was very interested in biodiversity discovery, like going out to the world and figuring out what species are out there. Can we classify them? Can we identify them? Are they known? Or are they things that nobody's ever seen before? Can we discover new species? So that's kind of one major focus of my work.
And if you're in North Carolina, but studying tropical bugs, where did that take you to? Yeah,
so in North Carolina, of course, for the majority of my graduate work, I was really taking classes and kind of training, right? Yeah. But then I spent a good deal of time in Costa Rica as a graduate student. And then that whole experience prepped me for my own research as I finished up. Okay. And we can go into that.
Okay, cool. Sorry, carriage before the horse.
But spoiler alert is I've had the real honor and privilege to work in countries all around the world. So, but to get there, it was a long road, and so I kind of lost my train of thought. So master's degree. Oh yeah, systematics. Okay, so systematics includes taxonomy and phylogenetics, and so the science of phylogenetics is using evidence based on a variety of different sources to reconstruct the evolutionary relationships of organisms, whether it's a plant or a bacteria or an animal. For me, it was insects. So I studied the taxonomy, biodiversity discovery, and then I used for my master's anatomical or morphological evidence to reconstruct evolutionary relationships of these weird things that I studied. And then as a PhD student, I went into molecular phylogenetics, which means that I learned how to do targeted DNA sequencing through the genome to use genetic evidence to reconstruct these relationships.
Wow.
So I'm an evolutionary. I have a lot of titles, right? So I consider myself an entomologist. Yes. I consider myself a tropical biologist. Yes. I consider myself an evolutionary biologist. Yes. taxonomist, phylogeneticist. So.
Well, it's like interesting too, because like you think about, okay, so I'm going to go be an entomologist. I need to understand bugs. And you're like, well, I need to understand their habitat and where they grow and like how that plays a point. But then you're like, well, that all is going to have an impact on like the history of everything and like where did those start from? Where did they change? Why did they change that way? So it's like all kind of interconnected and like it's not like you had this. You're like, well, I'm actually going to study chemistry too, or like become like a German literature professor. So it's like it's fascinating that it all is connected to paint this bigger picture that you have to get through with all the details.
And you put your finger on something important, and that is the reason to do science. I mean, I'm kind of talking about the mechanics of how I got there, but man, it's the curiosity. It's the basic discovery, the idea of the joy of discovery, of asking really basic questions of what, why, where, when. So these are the basic questions of science that are just so fascinating to discover. What insects are there? When did they evolve? Why did they evolve? Or where did they evolve? What describes their pattern through history such that they're found in the places that they're found today? So it's these basic questions, and then you use all these fancy techniques to kind of get there. But at its fundamental core, it's like a kid asking a simple question, which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I wish more people had that, because I think everybody to an extent is curious. Yeah. And I think we live in a society where like curiosity is dampened too early.
Yeah.
But I think whether or not you have this childlike curiosity, for lack of a better term, I mean, the scientific method in itself is something that everybody can apply more in their life, because we grew up in this world where, I mean, everything's at our fingertips. So it makes us think that we know everything because we can look at anything. Yeah. But like the way that you ask questions, the way you structure things, the way you go about collecting data to reject or accept a null hypothesis is a very different thing.
Very different.
Like even someone the other day, it's going to sound silly, but it was like in a comment and they were like, well, I just Googled this and that says you're wrong. I'm like, yeah, but you're like, the way you're asking the question already has inherent bias in it.
Totally. Yeah, and in fact, the way that I grew up and the way that many of us did in that generation is the scientific method in life, kind of writ large, right? So you make an observation, you check things out, you explore a little bit, you try a different little experiment, maybe that didn't pan out, you try something else, and so that's the scientific method kind of in life that we just then apply to these science questions in a laboratory setting.
Yeah, like even like zooming out to like path of career, like it's interesting with academia, and it can be applied in a lot of other places, but we'll use academia for the sake of the argument and the conversation. Is like, it's easy to be like, okay, cool, I got my undergrad, I'm gonna get my master's, I'm gonna go get my doctorate, I'm gonna go get my postdoc, and then I'm there. Once I have that, check the box, and I can go get my, I mean, it's very easy layout, but yeah. I feel like a lot of people, especially like after undergrad, or like wherever people's various jumping off point could be, it's like, all right, cool, like I don't know what is next.
Yeah.
And so many people just like, or if they do know what's next or think they do it and they just like do it forever. But really, like there should be more of this, like, all right, pause, analyze. Does this make sense? Are we like, is life good? Am I happy? Are my values being met? Am I with the people that I want to be? Is my time being spent in the right way?
Yeah.
And like sometimes it's like, no, we need to change something.
And you're right about that. And so many times during this whole arc that I'm describing to you, I either ask myself, am I on the right path, or maybe more poignantly, my family would ask, can you make a living doing this? What you're doing?
How are the bugs?
Yeah. And so I've always been a little bit on of the black sheep in the family in that regard. I mean, it was not a traditional career path that my family was experienced with, but it was, I think to your point, it was following that passion and following that inner drive to say, to kind of validate that, yes, I am on the right path for me, and it hopefully will lead somewhere pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, so far so good.
So, so my story then continues. I finished my graduate work in 1999, and as a kid from Vermont, having spent some time in the South, which was culturally interesting and different, I was offered a position of all places at Brigham Young University. As a postdoctoral
also very
researcher.
Different than those two places.
For a non-LDS kid from New England to go to kind of the heart of the Mormon, religion, at least academically, it was. But listen, I was there for 2 years, and at the time, it was a vibrant laboratory that I joined. I was the first postdoctoral worker in the lab for my advisor. but we had graduate students and undergraduates and other faculty members who were from all over the country,
Cool.
some all over the world, doing really exciting, engaging science. And it was just a really vibrant place.
It's almost like you did your own Mormon mission. In
Yeah,
Provo.
exactly. Right. Yeah, it's a good way to say it. So I spent 2 years at BYU and really was then introduced to Utah,
Okay.
was introduced to the not only the culture of Utah, but just the environment here. It's just blew me away.
I mean, for someone who likes to be outside and study the biodiversity and the entomology and the systems within them all, not a bad place to poke around.
Pretty darn good.
There's a couple more hills than what was it, Humpback Mountain?
Yeah,
Or-
totally.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's and just everything about it was alien and yet exciting. I mean, it just awe-inspiring, really. So I loved it. I mean, I loved it. But at the time, I knew that it was temporary. I knew that it was a fixed deal. I was 2 years in, and so during that time, I started to look for positions as postdocs do. You start looking around for the permanent job. And as I mentioned before, I thought I was going to be Jason Cryan professor of whatever at University of wherever.
Mm-hmm.
And before I really got too far down the road of applying to places for university jobs, and this takes maybe I'll step back and say the project I was working on as a postdoctoral worker was a project going back to my early roots working on ground beetles, and not my specialty through graduate school, but yet it was working on ground beetles that had evolved through the Hawaiian archipelago. And so each island in the chain has its own unique set of species. They don't fly, so they can't interbreed. They can't, from one island to the next island, they can't readily encounter each other and interbreed. So they had evolved to separate species. So there's this whole really interesting species complex across the archipelago.
Wow.
And I was doing taxonomy and evolutionary reconstruction and all of those things on them. I actually never went to Hawaii, so that was a bummer. I stayed in my
best part.
laboratory. I know, that was a bummer. But
You guys,
whatever.
it's time for me to go to Hawaii? Not yet, Jason.
Yeah,
not
sorry,
yet.
the field work's already done.
Yeah, just go look at the numbers and the pictures and everything. Like, cool.
Go sequence a gene, which is fine. That is totally fine. But the grant that was funding that research had been awarded to my postdoctoral advisor at BYU in collaboration with a faculty member at Cornell University back in upstate New York. He, the faculty member at the Cornell, had many colleagues in entomology throughout the state and elsewhere, of course, but one of those colleagues had contacted him and said, "Hey, I'm from the New York State Museum in Albany, New York, and we are looking for somebody, a bright young scientist who can come in and start a genetics laboratory to do evolutionary studies." And so that guy said, I got the guy. And so he called me and set me up and hooked me up with the folks at New York State Museum. And they said, "Listen, if you haven't heard of us, here's who we are, here's what we're intending to do. We'd like to fly you out and have you interview for this job." So even really without applying, they kind of flew me out. And
I mean, I can't imagine how many of you there are in the country, if not the world.
now there are more.
Yes.
Back then there were fewer. And so I was maybe not a unicorn, but I was, one of a small club.
And when they reached out, were you like, well, you know what, that sounds great. Maybe I'll come talk, but I really do want to go be, again, Dr. Cryan at University of wherever.
Yeah. No, I didn't. I said, that sounds great. Let me, I'd love to learn more.
Okay.
So, through the course, I'm maybe glossing over a few important facts. I'm a collections-based worker, as a researcher. So that means that I've used throughout my graduate work and beyond, I've used museum natural history collections to further my research. So looking at specimens, assessing taxonomy and phylogenetics from those specimens. So I was no stranger to the importance of natural history collections and their use in the kind of science that I do. So when they called, I said, "This is great. It sounds wonderful. Let me go out." So I went out and interviewed, and I was at the tail end of their interview process, and they ended up offering me the job on the spot, which was crazy. So I called my wife back in Provo, Utah, and said, "How do you feel about moving to Albany?" So that was my first job. So I never became, faculty at a university I since then have always been a museum-based scientist. So I worked at the New York State Museum for a dozen years. I ran the genetics lab there for those years, doing my own work and then facilitating the genetic portion of the research of other scientists at the museum. So it was a fantastic kind of collaborative environment. And during those years, I was then working on my own work. So I study weird things that are related to cicadas. They're all over the world, but primarily diverse in the tropics. Plant hoppers, tree hoppers, spittlebugs, all kinds of really weird, bizarre critters. And so during those years, I was successful with grants, research grants, specifically from National Science Foundation. And I had the privilege and honor to work, I think it's like 25 countries all around the world, Asia, Africa, Central and South America, through the Caribbean. And I would do the work that I had been trained to do. So biodiversity discovery, going out and studying these critters in their environment, collecting them, figuring out which ones are known, which ones are new to science. I've described many new species. Then bringing them back to the laboratory, sequencing their DNA and reconstructing their evolutionary pathways, relationships, and then using that as a hypothesis to talk about like meaningful, cool biological, questions. Where are they in the world? Why, as we said before, right? What are they? How are they related? Where are they in the world? How do they get there? When did they evolve? Yeah. What symbiosis do they have in their life history? So all of these cool questions that can only be answered if you know something about the evolution.
Yeah. When it's like I love that, like there's always that question that people have is like, what you do today is for your like 6-year-old self and your 60-year-old self.
Yeah.
And I love that you like your 6-year-old self is probably like, we did it, Jason. we're looking at bugs. We're crawling around outside.
To be clear, I'm not 60 yet, but
yeah, exactly.
But thank you.
We're still working with that guy to make sure he's proud of that. But it's so fun to see of like all of that. I mean, especially when, and like I'm kind of curious about, because you go through all of your research, you get to build your own lab there, and then be able to like further that research and finally get to travel to places instead of seeing all of the collections, which is probably great. But like when you were there at the New York State Museum, I mean, were you pretty exposed to a lot of other things in the museum, or were you pretty pigeonholed in entomology itself?
Yeah, it's a great question. So really that position allowed me to kind of understand the importance and appreciate the power of natural history museums, of science museums, right? So I immediately realized that my earlier career aspirations of being a professor at a university may not have fit me as well as where I found, right? So being in a museum is exciting. You have a ready infrastructure to encounter and engage with a science-curious public in ways, and so science education became very important to me, and I spent a lot of my time while at the New York State Museum engaging in educational programming and public kind of events and festivals and whatnot, because I realized the power of informal education and public science education. And that is an exciting part of museum work.
Like, and I always get envious of people who have really fast feedback loops. Yeah. Like it's one thing if like you're working in corporate America, you have your like blah blah blah, you do this, you send your report, you have your marketing plan, and then you have your annual review, maybe your biannual review, and like it's kind of like, and which are not exciting at all. Yeah. But to be able to be like, all right, kids. We're all right. Someone who's like, again, there because they're curious, they want to learn more and be like, I'm going to teach you something. Yeah. And they're like, I had no idea. This, like, I didn't know this about cicadas. I didn't know they could be in all these different places, and this is how it all works and how they like are so different, where you can find similarities and differences, and just like kind of watch them just be like kind of go in that, I imagine that like download mode where they're just like eyes open, just nodding.
Yeah.
Like I'm very envious of that.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's interesting to see. So you get into the science museum, the natural history museum side of things, and going there and being, I mean, a scientist and a researcher is one thing, but then to transition to, I mean, like the leadership side, like the management side. Yeah. I mean, was that thrust upon you? Was that something that you were searching for? Because sometimes it's a little bit of both.
It's a great question. So a couple things happened in coincidence. Okay. I would say that changed my career path yet again. The first thing is because I was successful with getting grants, basically. We always used to laugh and say, the good news is you got a grant. The bad news is you got a grant, because there's a lot of responsibilities that come with that. So it's not just going out into the world and playing; it's annual reporting and a lot of administrative paperwork that's related to accepting money from the federal government. Mm-hmm. So at one point in my career, while I was at the New York State Museum, I believe I was administering 3 separate major grants from the NSF, and it was taking a substantial amount of my time. So my students, my graduate students and postdocs, they were in the lab, they were going to places, they were kind of having the fun of science, and I was doing that still, but I was also doing a significant amount of administrative work. And so I kind of started to warm up to the realization that if I'm going to do the administrative work, maybe administration could be something I would consider as a full-time gig. The second thing is, there were 3 things that kind of were confluent. The second thing is I started to come to the professional realization that I was having a lot of fun and I was doing some really interesting work, I thought, but I wasn't certain that I was moving the needle on anything major, right? So I wasn't curing cancer. I wasn't making a societal impact that was meaningful to anyone aside from, oh, that's interesting. And so I kind of developed this growing feeling that I really wanted to do something bigger. I wanted to make a bigger, more lasting, more meaningful impact with my time. So that was number 2. And number 3, then the economic downturn of 2009, 10, 11 hit New York State disproportionately hard because of Wall Street and the kind of the way. So unfortunately at the time, the state government, and the New York State Museum was part of the state government, they were very concerned about fiscal responsibility and making sure that there was the impression of kind of fiscal conservatism. And their response to my requests of, this weird request of a guy at the State Museum wants to go to Central Africa to collect bugs, they decided that they were worried about the headlines if it hit the newspaper. And I'm being a little facetious. Right. It wasn't just me, it was all of the scientists. And they basically said, listen, we want you to focus on New York State, and all of this other international stuff we're really not excited about anymore. And yet I was bringing in millions of dollars of federal money, research money, to do that very work. And so my career looked like it was in jeopardy if I were to stay there. So given those 3 factors, I decided to just make a change. And I left the New York State Museum and went back to North Carolina, where I was able to take the job of Deputy Director and Director of Research and Collections for the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, which is the largest natural science museum in the Southeast. It's a beautiful museum. It's a great place in Raleigh, North Carolina. So for the second time in my life, I found myself moving from the Northeast down to Raleigh, North Carolina.
I see this pattern of this.
There's a pattern, and it doesn't stop there. So I decided, I intentionally moved from being an active scientist to being an administrator who advocated for the needs and represented the needs of a whole team of scientists doing really cool things. And that's where I started to feel like, okay, now I'm really maybe moving the needle. So it's not just me talking about Jason and his little laboratory. It's Jason fighting for the needs and representing these scientists who were doing awesome things. And now I had a staff of 30, for example, instead of just me. And that was really transformative. So I stayed there in that dual role, deputy director, where I did kind of strategic initiatives. I took part in strategic initiatives across the whole museum. And then I was the chief scientist, the director of research and collections for the scientific enterprise of that museum. I was there for 8 years in that role and learned a lot. And that was the time when I really learned how to run a museum kind of in a day-to-day fashion. So it was fantastic. It was great. And then the opportunity came to apply for a job back in Salt Lake City, back in Utah, at this phenomenal museum, the Natural History Museum of Utah. And so I was very fortunate to get this job. And so here I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing to see. I mean, like, because like it's one thing to chase a childhood passion, which I mean I think fuels a lot, or should fuel a lot of people's decisions in general of like what you're passionate about, where it wants to take you, and even the conversation like Kathleen Bodenlos, where she's like, yeah, like it's what like when I did like corporate America thing, and then all of a sudden I'm like, well, where was I happy, or what did I actually like doing? And then it took her back to that, and like it's where she was able to find it again. And with this, it's like interesting to see how, because like I mean, it's almost like a similar trend of like the downturn of New York, where it's like, oh well, we can't justify this, we can't make money off of this, like taking a passion and being like, well, here's how I can make it make sense for a lot of people, but also like defend the things that you are passionate about, of like, well, I'm going to help you not only with like the administrative part of grants and all the headache that it has, but also be like, I'm going to defend that what you're doing is important, and so that you can keep doing what you're doing. I'm going to be involved at some point, but I'm going to take or be this advocate for you.
Yeah.
And I mean, so talk to me about, I mean, the uniqueness of the Natural History Museum in Utah. Because I mean, I'm trying to think of how many natural history museums I've been to in my life, and it's got to be more than 3, less than 7. But I mean, talk to me about like the uniqueness of the museum that we have in the broader ecosystem of science and history museums.
Yeah. So, of course, I take everything I say with a grain of salt because I'm inherently biased.
Maybe a little bit.
I love this place. But so the NHMU is truly, how do I say it? It's small but mighty. And we're not even that small necessarily. We're considered a medium-sized museum. The museum was started through legislative action in the early 1960s. And it was the original intent of the museum was to basically aggregate all of the disparate research collections that faculty members across the University of Utah campus had begun and they were working on. But yet the university didn't have resources to kind of maintain all of those things. So they centralized all of those collections, brought them together such that, creating the museum, such that these collections could be preserved in perpetuity for, cultural and natural history preservation for future generations. So that's kind of the origins of the University of Utah and State of Utah's Natural History Museum. As I think you mentioned earlier, it was originally on the main campus at the university. It opened its doors to the public with kind of traditional natural history exhibitions in 1969, I believe, on President Circle and on the university campus. In the Thomas building, which used to be the university's library building, and then it was transferred to the museum. And it stayed this kind of quaint little natural history museum, very traditional, diorama-driven kind of exhibits for the next 40 years or so, 35 years anyway. There was, during that time, there were 3 directors. I'm the 4th director of the museum. There were 3 directors. My direct predecessor was Sarah George. She and her team started dreaming about making this museum something bigger, something that the whole state of Utah should be proud of. In fact, something that would be nationally recognized. And her work and the team's work over those many years resulted in, and I'm glossing over a lot of history, but it resulted in the building that we now occupy, the Rio Tinto Center, opened in 2011, and it's a phenomenally attractive building. It's a landmark architectural masterpiece. It's a building of 160 plus square feet that inside and outside reflects the natural geologic features of the state of Utah. It's just a gorgeous place, and when you build a new building as a museum, it gives you the opportunity to create bespoke exhibitions that fit intentionally the building and the educational paradigms that you want to present. And so again, inside and outside this building is just phenomenal with the special exhibitions or the permanent exhibitions that were created specifically for this building rather than, fitting them into a different building.
Yeah.
So the museum now has grown to, we are the largest museum in the Intermountain West. So to the east, the next larger museum is Denver Museum of Natural Science, and larger in terms of collection size, staff size, those kinds of things. And then to the west, the coast of California has several museums that are larger than we are. But in between those two boundaries, we are the largest museum. We are the state's designated Museum of Natural History. We're also the University of Utah's Museum of Natural History. So we have a kind of a dual identity, which is very interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting that the duality of it. And roughly how many people, because I remember going on so many field trips to the net, and I was always the kid who was like way excited. I'm like the front of the bus, just like, let's get there already. But how many students, in that capacity come through, and also just like general people come through the doors?
So we typically now, pre-pandemic, it was about $300,000 people a year.
Wow.
And we have now recovered almost to that size. So I'd say we're 97% recovered to that stage since the pandemic. Of those roughly 300,000 visitors, about 45,000 are school kids on field trips.
Oh, I would have guessed it was more, but that's cool that it's like.
Yeah,
because I like to think people like to go to
they love it.
Like I love going to museums when I go places, aquariums. I'm like that guy. It's also like I have weird habits I've learned when I go on vacation. Like when I go on vacation, for some reason I always want to watch game shows on TV.
Excellent.
And I want to go to museums, but if it's like at home, not as much.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that other people have that sentiment.
That's very cool.
Minus the game shows, probably.
Yeah. We'll have to talk about that later. It's great. And we actually receive, we're part of the Utah's ISEE, the Informal Science Education Enhancement Collective. So we are a group of informal science organizations that provide science education to Utah's public and charter school system. And so we receive a separate legislative appropriation for that. And it allows us to bring those 45,000 kids in on field trips free of charge. And so it's just a wonderful thing to be able to impact the public school system in Utah.
Yeah. And because I know that there's obviously the I want to say displays, but that's not the one. The
exhibitions.
There we go. Exhibitions that are there permanently versus ones that rotate out or so. But tell me about some of the permanent ones that are there. That whether it's just more general or also like specific to Utah itself.
Yeah. So as I said before, we have these amazing permanent exhibition galleries that are designed intentionally and really some really cool aspects that are kind of wow factors for people. So, for example, Utah itself is just such a great paleontological resource hotspot. Mm-hmm. One of the most diverse paleontological resource areas in the world, and it's precisely because we have rocks that are open to the environment, open to the air from millions of years through that whole timetable. So paleontologists can go and see dinosaurs in the rocks. So because of that, as you would imagine, our museum has an amazing paleontological collection. And so one of the permanent galleries in our museum is all about dinosaurs through time. And it's just a wonderfully laid out exhibition. You're on a pathway through time, essentially, and you can learn about different time periods and the animals that lived in those time periods. But it's laid out in a kind of a very progressive arrangement. And so it's not an old diorama. Yeah. It's something very exciting and very unique.
Yeah, I remember those dioramas on the one on President's Circle, and I'm glad we've evolved since then.
Exactly right. Evolution is in our DNA, we say. So there's that. Then there's a wonderful being, of course, in Utah. So maybe the theme, I'll start by saying the scientific themes, the environmental themes that we talk about, the cultural themes that we talk about are all done through the lens of Utah, but they're also all talking about ideas and theories and phenomenon that are broadly applicable across all science globally. So it is definitely a place-based museum. It's mostly about Utah, but the things that we learn there, the things that we talk about there, are really applicable to other areas as well. So you go through the Past Worlds Gallery, the whole dinosaur timeline, which is phenomenal, and you get to the Great Salt Lake Gallery. So again, a Utah place-based gallery that talks about the ecology and the biology and the geochemistry of the Great Salt Lake. And then, as I said intentionally, you can look out the window that's in that gallery and see the Great Salt Lake. So
cool.
It's such a great connection between the educational and the real, the environment, which is special.
Yeah.
And those kinds of moments are replicated through many of the other galleries as well.
Which is what I love about, again, going to museums and aquariums and such. Like, one of my favorite aquariums is Monterey Bay, and it's so cool because you can be in the aquarium and be like, hey, look, otters.
Yeah.
And then you go outside, you're like,
hey, look, otters.
And which is my favorite animal, fun fact.
Excellent.
But then also talk to me about some of the ones that you've had the pleasure of exhibitions you've brought in, and had over your tenure there.
Yeah, thanks. So in addition to these permanent galleries, we bring in typically 2 big special exhibitions a year. And we found that this is the right model for our museum. So it's these rotating temporary exhibits, each for about 5 or 6 months. They allow us to engage new folks, certainly, re-engage other visitors who have been there before, and they maybe have seen the permanent galleries, but yet this is something new and exciting that they come in. And we really encourage many of those visitors to transfer their tickets into memberships, because they realize that there's something always new at our museum, and they're always going to come back, bringing their kids, their grandkids, visitors, all kinds of things. So we've had a wonderful rotation of really world-class special exhibitions in the past few years. For example, we've had both natural sciences and cultural sciences exhibits, including Egypt, one about the pharaohs and Egyptian culture. We've had exhibits about the Angkor Empire, the Southeast Asian empire that disappeared in many tens of thousands of years ago. We've brought in exhibitions about orcas. We've brought in exhibitions about you name it. Dinosaurs, certainly.
I'm surprised every time you're not like, all right, guys, so there's this bug exhibition I'm thinking about.
Well, it's funny you say that, because the current exhibition that we have right now is one of my favorites, and you won't be surprised to know it's all about bugs. Bug World is with us right now, and it's just a mind-bending experience. Most of the other exhibitions I just mentioned are all kind of content rich, a lot of labels to read, a lot of objects to see. Bug World is it's a departure for us. This is an exhibition that was developed by the Te Papa National Museum of New Zealand in collaboration with Weta Workshops. So Weta Workshops, if you haven't heard that name before, you have absolutely seen their work. If you've seen movies like Lord of the Rings or Hobbit or Avatar or a host of other movies. Yeah. And they're famous cinematically for taking kind of cool science fiction fantasy work concepts and making hyper-realistic props and costumes. And so National Museum of New Zealand and Weta Workshops combined to create this totally immersive kind of Alice in Wonderland experience where you are essentially the size of a bug, and you go into these 4 focal experiences in the gallery, and you are immersed in the world of an insect. And each of those 4 experiences highlights a different superpower of insects, for example. But you're in it. You're not reading labels. You're not watching videos necessarily. You are face to face with a giant insect doing something really cool and engaging. It's the wow factor.
So you get to know what it's like to be a ground beetle.
Absolutely.
Of different elevations hiking around.
Totally right. Yeah. I would say this exhibition will be with us through the summer of 2026, and it will continue to draw just throngs of excited people. It's really it's a phenomenon.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And then looking even more forward, I mean, are there any other, big projects you're working on? Any other big exhibitions coming through that people?
Yeah, we're excited. We have several coming up. We schedule our special exhibitions out for several years. So we're working on an internal exhibition right now. So we're developing it at our museum. This is all about the traditional weaving tradition, the weaving traditions of the 8 federally recognized Native American tribes in Utah, specifically regarding basketry, basket production, but also with other specialty kind of baskets like cradle boards, the apparatus that Native Americans used. They were woven like baskets, but they would use to carry their infants on their backs. So this is going to be a really exciting exhibition. It's beautiful. And this is an exhibition for which we've kind of pioneered, maybe that's not the great word to say. We have developed a really thoughtful approach to working with our Native American partners to co-curate this exhibition. So we have representatives from all of the 8 tribes of Utah working with us to develop the content and the look and the feel and the learning objectives of this exhibition, which will open up in December, I believe, of 2026.
Okay.
It's going to have a really unique look and feel to it. It's going to tell the very important stories of Native American culture in Utah. It's going to be very interesting.
Amazing.
So that's exciting. And then beyond that, looking forward, we're working with another company right now to develop a really unique exhibition on the history and culture of Japan. So that'll be exciting, and that'll allow us to make, forge new relationships with the Japanese community here in Salt Lake area. But that's going to be an interesting special exhibition because it's going to tell these stories of Japanese history and culture through the lens of flowers, specific flowers that are meaningful to Japanese culture. So chrysanthemum, sakura, the cherry blossom, all of these. There are several other flowers that we'll be using to tell stories that are unique to the Japanese culture.
But actually, 2 questions.
Yeah.
One I wanted to ask you from the beginning before we even sat down, and the second one, as soon as we got 5 minutes in, I want to ask you. Number 1, what's your favorite dinosaur?
I'm an entomologist, but I've been learning a lot about paleontology in my role as director. So I would say my favorite dinosaur. I really like ceratopsians.
Okay.
Ceratopsians are very cool. So these are the horned dinosaurs. Triceratops is the most famous one, but man, the diversity of the other ones are just super cool. And so it's really, and our museum has this beautiful signature display. We call it the ceratopsian wall, which is essentially a dozen or so ceratopsian skulls mounted on the wall with an evolutionary tree that maps the relationships across those.
Very Jason coded.
Very Jason coded. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why I love this museum when I was applying for this position is the ubiquity of the use of evolutionary trees throughout our gallery.
Yeah.
So ceratopsians are so cool because they, originally we thought with Triceratops, they had this really thick kind of shield-like head frill, but yet all of these other things have very delicate head frills, and so if they're not shields, then what are they? What are those structures for? What could they have been used for? And so it just generates all kinds of really interesting discussions about evolution and adaptation and whatnot.
Yeah, so many, always leads to more. One answer leads to more questions, and then you just keep going.
Yeah.
And then secondly, and actually I just thought of a third question. Secondly, what's your favorite? I think I might know the answer, but what's your favorite insect?
Yeah. So it depends if you're looking for a group of insects or a specific insect. So
both.
Okay, so the group of insects, tree hoppers are just wacky. I mean, I love other things that I study. I study all of the things that are related to cicadas. I don't actually study cicadas, but all of their cousins, if you will. It's the scientific name is Alcinarynca. That doesn't really matter, but they include this wacky family of animals these are all sap-sucking insects. So their mouths are adapted into a straw, and they stick that straw into the substrate. In this particular case, they're plant eaters, so they stick it into a tree, and they will suck out either the xylem or the phloem of the tree, the two liquid tissues in vascular plants. This group, particularly this tree hopper group, they're phloem feeders, which is kind of interesting, and they are just entomologically famous for having wacky shapes and colors and life history syndromes.
Yeah.
Just amazing. When I show pictures of these things to people, very frequently I'm asked, you photoshopped this, right?
Yeah,
This
that's
is not real.
though.
Yeah. But they are.
Yeah.
There's one particular, to answer the second question, there's one particular tree hopper that is grown to be my favorite. This is a species that takes, if you indulge the story, it's a species that I had described 29 years ago, and I know that date because my wife, at the time, still my wife, but at the time she was pregnant with our our son. She went into labor early, and so we were sitting in the hospital, and the doctors are like trying to hold her off because he was preemie. And so I figured, well, I'll sit with her, but I'll do some work. And I was working on a manuscript that included several new species descriptions. One of which was a single weird little bug that I had found in a collection, I think, from the National Museum of Natural History at the Smithsonian. And it was this wacky little thing that was from Ecuador, I think. Bizarre. It was a singleton. And so my wife and I really only intended to have one kid. We figured, well, he's going to be a singleton. He's going to be a weird little thing. So let me name this weird little bug after this weird little baby. And so we had chosen the name Nathaniel for our son. And so was born Nathaniel Cryan, but also was born Lycodares Nathaniel, Nathaniel's tree hopper.
That's amazing.
Which was cool. So it remained in taxonomic obscurity for years because it was just a single little bug in a drawer at the Smithsonian. Nobody knew anything about its life history, what it did in real life, and the whole thing. It was just a bug on a pin. Until when my son was in high school, and in that intervening period, social media became a thing, and Facebook grew, and I had joined several Facebook pages where people would send in pictures of weird insects and say, hey, can anyone identify this?
I can see you just curling up in a chair.
I was there.
Yeah.
So I became known as the guy who could kind of, identify these weird tree hoppers.
Yeah.
So lo and behold, one Facebook user sent me a picture of this beautiful weird tree hopper. He said, listen, I just went to Ecuador. I don't know anything about this, but I took a picture of this thing, and do you know what it is? It was a live picture, of a living Lycodares nathanieli. So the second time now, this thing kind of came back into my life. So that was cool, and I identified it, and it's great, beautiful macro photography of this gorgeous little species. So then time passed, and I made my way out here to Utah, and just now a couple of years ago, I was entertaining a visitor to the museum who's a children's book author, and we were talking about my career and what I study and blah, 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 and she said, tree hoppers. I have a friend, and she was from Seattle. She said, I have a friend back in Seattle who's a painter, and she really likes painting weird little, bugs, and I think she just painted some tree hoppers. Let me go back to Seattle, and I'll send you a picture of her new painting. I said, fine, that's great. A couple of weeks later, I get this email with an attachment, and I open it up, and it's a picture that this lady had painted of tree hoppers, and one of them is Lycodares nathanieli. So it's this insect that keeps on popping up in my life in different ways, and maybe just like my son, he just keeps on popping back up. But it's great. That's
fun.
Really my favorite.
I mean, I see why in Sony. I don't know why I developed it, but I always had my North Star is always like blue jays. So if I see a bluebird, I'm like, all right, we're on the right path. Sure. And so similarly, it's like this singleton just keeps popping up, and in such unique, every way is so different too.
And everyone's different, and it's interesting, and we still don't know anything about its life history or exactly.
That's be the next way it pops up.
That'll be
show up in a
something,
journal or something.
Exactly. So yeah, it's really cool.
So obviously people can know the museum, they go see it, they go on field trips, but kind of like you've alluded to, is like a big function of the museums is like this research that is done. Yeah. So maybe give a few examples of like research that's being done, maybe more behind the scenes that people may not see in their typical tour of the museum.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for asking for that, because it really, truly, our museum is what we call a true science museum, and that we are differentiated from science centers in that we maintain the natural and cultural history collections for the state of Utah. We have 2 million plus specimens and objects that we maintain in those collections. And we have a whole cadre of people who are scientists preserving those collections, but also doing authentic research. So we are truly an authentic science research institution. And man, I tell you, the team is doing some really cool stuff. So we have people working here in Utah on a variety of things, both cultural history aspects, questions about. We have one of our archaeologists, anthropologists, works on. I should mention Dr. Elizabeth Lauterbach. She's working on the the history and cultural usage of the Four Corners potato, which is this unique kind of plant that has been found in archaeological remains of cultures that were here thousands of years ago. And so this is a plant that was used as a food source and then had since been lost, essentially, and is now coming back. And so we have research going on about that. We have research going on about paleontology, certainly. We have our paleontology team is unearthing new dinosaur species across southern Utah. Our paleontologist, Dr. Randy Ermis, in addition to the Utah work, is also doing paleontological work down in Patagonia and Argentina. And so he's using his knowledge of the geologic history and paleontology to make connections that span not only millions of years of time, but also modern geography and continental changes. We have another paleoecologist who's doing amazing work crawling through caves that have never been explored in not only in Utah, but also in South Africa, in the cradle of humanity. And so he's discovering animals and early humans that people have never seen before in recorded history. So we have just people doing amazing work, and that's just the beginning. We have so many others. We have people doing amazing work illuminating the nature and culture of Utah, and then connecting us to the rest of the world.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I mean, it's like fascinating to see, like, even talking to you today, like, it's wild, like, cause like my naivete is like, oh yeah, we've discovered so much of it. I mean, we've been here so long, we've explored so much, like every stone's been overturned. Sure. But in reality, it's like, au contraire, there's so much more to do, so much more to catalog, so much more to index, so much more to discover. I mean, even your favorite bug, you're like, I've seen it in a museum. Yep. Some guy on Facebook showed me a picture, and then some other woman sent me an email of a painting. Yeah. Other than that, that's kind of like all the context I have. And I'm sure that there are not many more people that would have the life exposure to be like, oh, I've actually seen it a bunch, Jason. Here it is, like, you know? Sure. And so I love that it's like there's still this excitement of the world, not just around you, but around all of us to discover in a world where we're like, we've discovered it all. It's not like we're going, like, we're not Amerigo Vespucci going across the world, or like going to the moon or the bottom of the, bottom of the ocean might be a different one. But it's so fascinating that you still get to have those aha moments and light bulbs and get to discover it all, but also be able to be in a capacity where you get to help people you get to facilitate it for so many other people in so many other capacities at scale.
Absolutely right. I've had, just fortunately, myself personally, I've had the great fortune of working around the world. But discovery can happen right here. And there's a fantastic story that I hope you'll agree with me is really inspiring. And that is, we have a great colleague at the museum. He's a faculty member at the University of Utah, Dr. Jack Longino. And Jack and I had originally met tromping through the jungles of Costa Rica. Kind of, we just ended up two entomologists in the same place. It was pretty cool. So I've known him for years. However, he had worked in Oregon, and then he maybe a decade or so ago came to Utah. He is an ant biologist, so he's a specialist in ants, primarily throughout the New World, Central America, South America, but really globally. He's well known. He moved to Utah as a new faculty member here, and he bought a house up in the Avenues with his wife, who's a tropical forest ecologist, a canopy ecologist. And he was looking in his new backyard for bugs, and he found a species that he didn't recognize. It turns out he found a new species of ant, in his backyard in Salt Lake City, Utah. So, I mean, the moments for discovery are all around us. You don't have to go to a rainforest in the tropics. You can just observe your own surroundings, and you'll find something cool.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I can't imagine, like, all right, just moved in, just closed, we're moving in, and what is that? and here's something new. Man, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Jason, I mean, I love that. I love like coming back to like the moment that inspired all of you. I mean, going on this hike with this guy, like being very drive, saying, "Oh, here's all this and this which inspired you." I love that you get to be in a capacity where I have no doubt that there's going to be someone in the future where they're going to be on a podcast and be like, "So, what made you want to study entomology?" Like, "Well, I was on this field trip and there's this guy who showed me this bug and he told me about this tree hopper and singleton, and so it just made me want to go explore the world." So, I mean, thank you for not just, chasing your passions and doing what's great, but also just inspiring a whole cadre of new people that are going to, carry on that legacy in some way, shape, or form.
Well, thanks for inviting me to tell the story. It's great to be here, and I'm honored to be in the position where I can, maybe help shape the next generation.
Totally.
Yeah.
And before we wrap, I want to ask the two questions I always ask every guest. Number one, if you could have someone on the Small Lake City podcast and hear more about them, their story, and what they're up to, who would you want to hear from?
Nalini Nadkarni. She's the forest ecologist that Jack Longino is married to.
All right.
She's world renowned as one of the pioneers of tropical canopy research, and she lives right here. She's doing amazing things.
We'll go hang out in her backyard and see if we can discover something else.
Perhaps.
And then lastly, if people want to, keep in touch with the museum, know what's going on, what's the best place to find information?
Yeah, all the information can be found at our website, nhmu.utah.edu.
Okay.
Yeah.
Deal. Jason, thanks so much for all your work. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much.
I'm excited.